Greetings, Chris again. Before we start actually modeling inside of Maya, we need to understand the best saving practices for Maya, as well as how to move your project from one computer to another so that if you are working on a different computer or you are doing some sort of team-based project or someone else needs to look at your work, they will have access to all of your assets in a convenient place. So before we start actually modeling, let's learn how to create a new project folder. This project folder will hold all of those assets as I was just mentioning. So let's follow along. If you go up to File and then down to Project Window, you'll get this project window. And where it says Current Project, yours might say something like Default. But anyway, you're going to hit New. And I'm going to name this C. Mendenhall, that's my last name, _ learning, right? And where it says location, you're going to click on this folder and choose where you want to save it. So I typically do not recommend saving work on the desktop. I would choose your C drive or D drive preferably. But for this demonstration, I will just be saving on the desktop. So I'm going to hit select. And then once you're done with all that, we're not going to change any of this other stuff. Just hit accept. Let's take a look at what that project folder looks like. If I open it, here it is. So many of these folders we will not be using for our purposes. However, for the sake of learning, I would like you not to delete any of them. Just keep everything as default. And definitely do not get rid of this workspace folder. But as we populate our project with assets, it will all go inside of this folder. If we save the scene, it will go inside the scenes folder. If we have textures, they'll go inside the source images folder, and so on and so forth. But this is good. So whenever you work on a new computer or you want to share your work, you will need to move the entire project folder. All right. And when you do open up the project on a new computer, you will first need to set the project before you open the scene. The scene is just the model or what is essentially displayed in the viewport along with any assets that are attached to it. Okay, so to set the project, we're going to go to File, Set Project, click on your project wherever you saved it, and hit Set. Now, if you go to File, Open Scene, you'll see that it's looking inside of your project in the scenes folder, which is what you want. This is how you know that your project is set correctly. So make sure that's working for you. Now let's learn how to save a scene. Let's start just by creating a cube. So I'm going to go up here to the left and create a polygon cube by clicking here. It's going to show up in the viewport on the grid. And to save, we're going to go File, Save Scene As, and I'm going to name this saving demo _ VO1, and then I'll hit Save As. Alright, now we've saved this scene. Let's go ahead and create a cylinder next. That's going to show up on top of the cube. Now let's save again. File, Save Scene As. I don't want to just hit File, Save Scene, or it will overwrite the version 1, right? V is version 01. So I'm going to save this as Saving Demo VO2. So now if I go to File, Open Scene, you'll see I have two different versions, right? Version 02 is the one with the cube and the cylinder, and version 01 is just the cube. So let's go ahead and open up version 1. Maya is notorious for crashing, and it's a wonderful program and I enjoy working in it. However, there have been plenty of times where I've been working and the program just closes without warning, without an error message. So it's important to save often, and in versions you'll want to back up your saves. I know I've mentioned this before, but have your saves in more than one location as well. You could set a timer, and when that timer goes off, you could manually save, or you could turn on the autosave feature, which I will show later. So the cube that we have here is a Polygon primitive. Polygon primitives are basic starting blocks for polygon modeling, and we can find several of them up here. Poly modeling, right? I can also hold shift and right click for the marking menu, and if I wanted a cylinder, for example, I could hover over cylinder and let go, right? If I want to undo an action, I can hit Z. I actually don't want that cylinder, so I'm going to hit Z. Now it's gone. I can also go to Create Polygon Primitives, and here's a full list of all the polygon primitives available to you. The most common primitives that I find, that I use, would definitely be the cube, the cylinder, the plane, and the sphere, probably followed by the torus, right? And we'll cover those shortly. Let's start by learning some basic actions to manipulate our cube. So as a review, we can rotate around the scene by holding Alt and left click and dragging. We could zoom by holding Alt and right click and dragging, or using the scroll wheel on the mouse. And then you can pan around the scene by holding Alt and middle mouse clicking and dragging. If I hit spacebar, I can go to the orthographic views and the perspective view. If I want to zoom fully in, I can hit spacebar while hovering over top of one of these views. Notice how each one of these views has its own menu, and that menu is how the model is being displayed. Okay, so let's cover some of that. To select your object, you can click on it, and it will highlight the edges in green. So I'm going to go over some shortcuts that are important to understand. The first is 3, the number 3 on your keyboard. If you hit that, it will show you what your object looks like when it's been smoothed. This will become important later, and I will discuss why in a different lesson. To get out of smooth preview, hit 1 on your keyboard. So 1 and 3 toggles between smooth preview on and off. If you hit 2 on your keyboard, you will see what smooth preview looks like, as well as the additional, like the original actual wireframe. Remember that smooth preview is just a preview. Your object has not been actually smoothed. So I'm going to hit 1 to exit smooth preview. If I hit 4 on the keyboard, it's the same as pressing this little icon right here. And this is wireframe display. So this is just showing the wireframe, right? If I click off the object, I can see the wireframe like so. If I hit 5 on the keyboard, this will go back to shaded display. 6, if we had any textures attached to this, they would show up if you hit 6. 7 will turn the lights on. There are no lights in the scene, so that's why this is black. So I'm going to hit 5 to go back to shaded display. Next, let's learn how to manipulate the cube. First, I'm going to select the cube, and I will hit W on the keyboard. W is the shortcut for the move tool, which is the same as clicking over here. So when you click on the move tool or hit W for the first time, the move widget will show up in the center or wherever the pivot is for the object. And it looks like this. To change the size of the move tool, you can hit the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. I find that the default size is good most of the time, so I like to leave it like this. So there are different portions of this widget that you can click on and select. I can click on these arrows, these squares here, or this middle square. Whichever one is highlighted in yellow is the current selected direction or axis. So by default, this middle square is what is selected. If I were to click and drag on this middle square, what is happening is it is moving the cube in all 3 directions, all 3 axes at the same time. This is an inefficient way to work, and it can create problems down the road. So I recommend almost never using this to move anything. Okay, so it's going to be better if you click on a direction that you want to move the object in and then drag it, right? So these colors correspond to the different axes, and you can see in the left hand corner of the viewport we have this little compass. So green is Y, up and down. Z is depth, and it's blue. Red is X, and that's side to side. So I can click and move these in those axes. These squares in between the axes will lock movement only in, so this blue square will lock movement between, you will only be able to move it in the Y and X axis, right? And here's the Y and Z and the Z and X. So I'm going to undo until I get back to the middle, which is the origin point, which is 0, 0, 0 on the grid. If I hit E, it will go to the rotation tool. By default, it will look like this. This outer ring will rotate based on your camera angle, so it's going to rotate in all three axes, and again, that is not recommended. So it's going to be better if you rotate in one axis at a time. Typically, you're going to want to rotate in increments of specific degrees. To step, snap, and rotate, you can hold J and then click and drag, and you will snap in increments of 15 degrees by default. If I hit R on the keyboard, you can see we're working our way down. There was W, E, and R. R is the scale tool. The middle cube will scale uniformly, and then again, we can scale based on independent axes. Undo. So let's take a minute and use the move, rotate, and scale tools to just manipulate our cube. Something to note, which is important for later on, is that once you have an axis selected in any of these tools and it is highlighted in yellow, you do not have to actually move your mouse and click and drag on it. You can just middle mouse click anywhere in the viewport and drag. This will become helpful when snapping later. Alright, once we've rotated, scaled, and moved our cube a bit, let's take a look at the channel box in the top right corner here. You'll see there's translate X, Y, and Z, rotate X, Y, and Z, and scale X, Y, and Z. These numbers represent the manipulations that we just made to this object. So if we wanted to get this back to its original state, we could just change these numbers back to their original state. So we know that the origin point right here is 0, 0, 0. Keep in mind that if your object is not selected, nothing will be in this channel box, right? So I'm going to click on this cube. I'm going to change translate Y to 0, translate Z to 0, rotate Y to 0, rotate Z to 0, scale to 1, which is 100%, 1, and 1, right? And now we have what we originally did. I'm going to hit my move tool. As I move this cube around, notice what is happening inside the channel box. The translate Z number is changing, and that's based on the movement. This is happening in real time. Those numbers, like 1.09, so represent the number of grid spaces that I'm moving. So if I know that I want to center this cube on this point on the grid, I could say, okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I could just come over here and type in 4, right? And it will move it to that exact spot. Additionally, if I know I want to rotate this in the y-axis 45 degrees, I could come over to rotate y and type in 45. So pause the video and take a moment to experiment with typing in numbers here and make sure that you understand how that works. Alright, so it's helpful to know that we can get the polygon primitive back to where it was by changing all this to zeros and ones, right? Let's go ahead and rotate and scale and move our object again. Let's say we really like this location for whatever model we are working on, and we want this to be the new origin point for this particular piece. So we can zero these out and change this to 1 by doing what's called freezing the transformations. To do that, select the object and go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Alternatively, you can select the object and click on the shortcut, which is right here in the poly modeling shelf. It is a snowflake. It says 0, 0, 0. I'm going to click on that, and now you'll see that even though the object has been moved and rotated and scaled, After freezing the transformations, these are all at 0 and 1. So now if I were to move it from here and rotate and scale, if I ever wanted to get it back, I could change this back to 0, 0. This guy could go back to 1. That's how you freeze transformations. Let's go ahead and delete this object. So I'm going to select it and hit delete. Let's create a new cube. I'll hit W to go to my move tool. I'm going to talk about snapping now briefly. And the first basic type of snapping is grid snapping. So you can turn grid snapping on by clicking on this little button right here. And if I turn that on, you'll see that it will snap to increments on the grid. The shortcut for that is hold X and then click and drag. When you let go of X, it will turn grid snapping off. This is how I use grid snapping when I use it. So let's go ahead and grid snap in one direction. Hit spacebar to go to your orthographic view, and let's try grid snapping in these other orthographic views. And notice how it's updating each view on the fly. So you'll see that I've moved these in all these other views, and in my perspective view, the cube is no longer visible because it's over there, right, and beneath the grid. So I could come over here and pan and zoom and start to rotate and try and center on this. A better way to do that, if you ever find a selection is out of frame, instead of panning and zooming your camera around to center on it, you can hit the F as in Frank on your keyboard, the F key, and it will focus in on the object or the selection. So I can do that on each of these orthographic views by hovering over and hitting F. This is a very helpful tool which will save you a lot of time. I'm going to hit spacebar over the perspective view and delete the cube, and then I could hold shift right click and go down to cube. So let's create another cube. You can choose which way you would like to create the cube. Let's hold X and grid snap it to the left. Next, let's create a cylinder, and we'll grid snap it to the left again. Then I'll create a plane, and lastly I will create a sphere, and I will grid snap it to the right. This is where we're going to stop for this lesson, so let's go ahead and save our work. File, save scene as, and I'll name this Saving Demo version 3 and hit save as. In the next video, we will cover polygon components and manipulating those, as well as some organization of your scene. See you there.